Well, thank you all for joining us for this very last element of this year's shift. And we want you to come back in and once again, let us know who you are, where you're coming from, introduce yourself to the other folks that are on our final presentation here as well. And as I mentioned this morning, if you have suggestions for topics for us to focus on for next year that would bring value to the health and nature movement and the space overall, please drop that into the chat as well and use it as an opportunity to talk with the other folks that are here about where we could add the most substance and value to this discourse in this period of such urgency. So thank you for that. I would like to thank our sponsors who have made this year's program possible. In particular, of course, our presenting sponsor, All Trails, who stepped in early in the year on the heels of being such a great sponsor last year and really helped underwrite both this program and then the program for the Health and Nature webinar series as well. They did that alongside the National Park Service, another fantastic partner. We'd also like to thank Christy Walton, the Esther and Otto Sullivan Foundation, the VF Foundation, Patagonia, the Cliff Bar Family Foundation, Wellbeing Trust, 1908 Brands, and Boulder Clean, Ravana Designs, the Laura L. and Martin N. Kelly Family Foundation Trust, Marcia Kunstel, and Curtan Management Solutions. I would also like to thank our board of directors, our board chair in particular, Frederick Reimers, along with Mickey Fern, Dr. Suzanne Bartlett Hackenmiller, Sandy Schultz-Hessler, Jess Saba, Gerben Sherpier, Tanner Yes, and Julie Williams. Thank you all for carrying us over the course of this year, per usual. And then, of course, I would like to thank our team. Dr. Morgan Green, Director of the Emerging Leaders Program. Thank you, Morgan. Arian Davis, our project manager, and Meredith Davison, our marketing consultant. Thank you both. You've made this possible. We are very grateful, and we are a very small but mighty team, and each one of these folks has played a pivotal role in this year's shift and in our organization's evolution overall. So thank you so much. And so we come to the final program of this year's shift, and it's appropriate that we end by looking ahead. We started the Emerging Leaders Program in 2016 to create pathways for the next generation of leaders in the outdoor rec and conservation communities. We wanted to ensure that the work that we were doing at Shift was relevant to the national discourse. And we knew we couldn't do that without a diversity of young voices, lived experiences, and perspectives. This is, after all, their world. We're just holding their seats at the table. The Emerging Leaders Program trains early career leaders to help develop our work at Shift and in America. Our vision is to build a diverse coalition of advocates who can champion the health benefits of nature and fight for a more sustainable future. By developing tools and strategies for reconnection with our natural world, the program trains participants, whom we call our fellows, via a framework that empowers them to address problems facing public health, conservation, advocacy, structures of oppression, and community engagement. The program is led by Dr. Morgan Green. He is a pediatrician in Detroit. He's a fellow of the 2018 program. Under his leadership, each year's curriculum incorporates feedback from past cohorts in order to honor topics surrounding equity, inclusion, and systemic barriers. This in turn allows fellows to more deeply consider the intersections of health and nature and how such discussions impact their lived experiences while also harnessing the ingenuity and creativity that makes the program innovative. ELP is developed, facilitated, and led entirely by program fellows and Shift team members. Each ELP is comprised of two distinct components. During the program itself, a series of discussions led by our facilitators explores our core content. The second half of the experience is Shift. Cohort fellows are invited to participate as panelists, speakers, hosts, and moderators throughout the summit, working alongside veterans in the space to ensure their priorities and perspectives are included in conversations of national importance. The program is now 4 years old. More than 100 fellows have graduated from its ranks. Along the way, we've had stumbles and rejoicing, triumphs and tears. Many alumni of the program have joined our organization as board members, ELP team members, or as in the case of Dr. Green, as the director of the program itself. This year, ELP, like the rest of our lives, went virtual. So for the past 2 months, the 22 cohort members have been meeting weekly with programming facilitated by past ELP fellows, SHIFT board members, and the ELP fellows themselves. As with past cohorts, this year's fellows are a remarkable group. Unlike past cohorts, the majority of them have never met in person. Also, unlike past cohorts, their program took place during a year that can safely be called an upside down, inside out, sideways, and every other way rolling catastrophe. It is a testament to their tenacity, their brilliance, their commitment, both to the health of the planet and that of all of its inhabitants, human and otherwise, that they took this too in stride. So last night I received an email from Dr. Green about this year's cohort. He wrote, "This has been a group of people who lean into uncertainty with optimism, intelligence, and compassion. Knowing the reason behind the necessity of a virtual ELP, they embrace the chaos of this year with an admirable energy. Their talent, humor, and the seamless way they connected through this experience has inspired me. They became a unit who willingly brought their entire selves to our discussions. As we set the stage to discuss protecting inner joy in the times of severe burnout, showing compassion in the face of systemic inequality, and respecting other ways of knowing, this group supported one another and established bonds that will carry them through hardship. As they collaborated and taught one another from their vantage points of impactful work done across the globe, I was humbled to see just how smart they are. This is what our future needs to look like." The path ahead for all of us is rugged, and the outcome is unknown. It is filled with danger and doubt and peril. But as a mentor once said to me, without risk, there is no adventure. I, for one, am reassured knowing that they'll be taking the lead. So to help conclude this year's shift, I'd like to welcome 2 fellows of the 2020 Emerging Leaders Program. Alysa Delgado is the Parks and Natural Resources Coordinator for Three Rivers Park District in Scott County, Minnesota. Alyssa's love for nature and passion for the outdoors has led her from an upbringing in Central Maryland, across educations in the Southeastern US and Central America, through a year at the Smithsonian in Washington, DC, to her current work and its focus on interactions with parklands and resource management within the Twin Cities region. In this role, she has piloted a health and nature program, expanded the conversation of equity and fee assistance program offerings, and helped organize community engagement efforts within the planning process. Joining Alysa is Caroline Lindquist, who is pursuing her master's in landscape architecture at UC Berkeley. Her academic interests include restoration ecology, environmental justice, and biophilic design. A North Carolina native, Caroline previously worked for the city of Raleigh on the planning of Dorothea Dix Park, Raleigh's emerging Central Park, where she managed the creek restoration and landfill remediation project, as well as the youth engagement for the park master plan. Her work included research of the site history, which ranges from Native American land to a plantation to a mental health hospital, in order to illuminate the stories of marginalized groups. Of all the emerging leaders, Alysa and Caroline may be the only 2 who have ever met, having shared their senior year at UNC Chapel Hill together. Neither knew the other was applying for ELP. It has been an honor to have Alysa, Caroline, and all the other fellows in this year's cohort, and a pleasure to work with them on shift. Please join me in welcoming Alysa Delgado and Caroline Lindquist.
Thank you so much, Christian, for that lovely introduction. And Caroline, I'm so happy to be here with you and to be, chatting, even though it's virtually. I wish we were doing it in person, but so we can kind of break down not only the past few days of this really amazing conversation of the Shift Summit, but also just our time in ELP.
Yeah, definitely. It's been an amazing group of people in ELP and a great week here at Shift. I was just thinking, as Christian was talking about how the Shift group really has brought their whole selves to the program, I was reflecting back on one of our early conversations where we all had a social hour where we talked about what our quarantine hobby has been. And we had amazing things, people talking about things from soap making to sewing to journaling to get through this really challenging time. And I think that really helps set the stage for talking with each other and feeling comfortable in that work.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, all of those stories from the beginning is kind of setting the tone of, this is a weird time. COVID is not normal. 2020 is not normal, but there are people out there like in our network doing the same thing, like also feeling the same way and trying to make the best of it. And that kind of that like sense of community and that sense of collaboration definitely has given me hope that, I'm not alone trying to fight this good fight, that we're out there together doing it. Yeah, so it's really been truly amazing. And then to be able to come to the conference and to, see all of these other ELP cohort members thriving on panels and thriving as moderators and standing alongside veterans in the field and these amazing, community partners. It's super inspiring to kind of see, the reflections of ourselves. They're now our friends, they're our colleagues, and we're seeing them. And it's just been like a really amazing past few days.
Definitely, definitely. It's funny, having started with quarantine hobbies, we were learning this amazing side of people, and we hadn't even heard the incredible work that they were doing. And now to really get to see that really shine through this Shift Summit has been incredible. I've had these moments of, wow, I had no idea that person was doing such incredible work. Or I remember reading that in the bio back in July, but to hear it articulated is incredible. So thank you to this amazing group of ELP folks, and then also to this incredible summit for getting to share that conversation with everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Echo that completely. So I know that you were in the Next Gen group throughout the panels, and I would just kind of love to hear your take on everything. I was in the resource management one. So yeah, what were some of the things that really stuck out to you?
So I want to go ahead and actually start with a quote from one of them that has been sticking with me a lot, especially as Christian was talking about kind of this next generation that is coming up. Louise Chawla shared a study that she worked on where she interviewed children talking about what Earth will look like in 100 years. And she shared that one of the students said something along the lines of, in 100 years, everything will die out. There'll be less trees and less plants. There'll be less nature. It just won't be a good Earth anymore. And that was—
Breaks my heart.
I know, of course, really, really hard to hear and to think about a 10-year-old or 7-year-old already having that in their mindset at that age is a lot of weight to carry. But to go forward with a little bit of hope, she then dug into talking about meaning-focused coping to allow individuals to process climate change in an emotionally healthy way and incentivize them to solve the issue. And so it was actually great to kind of start with that point at the beginning of the week and then dive into these conversations of, well, what can we do to make this a better Earth? How can we connect people in an equitable way so that they become independent in nature, are connected within their communities, and really then continue to be stewards showing reciprocity to the Earth. So Alysa and I were saying earlier today, we heard such amazing things that we don't know how we can possibly echo all of the brilliance that was shared this week. But those were just a few things that really stood out to me. And also the emphasis on the importance of kind of that little W wild, not the huge nature treks, but those day-to-day encounters with nature that I know also came up in the nature resiliency panel as well, the importance of that to keep strong mental health, especially during these times of COVID. Alysa,
Yeah.
do you want to hop in and talk a little bit about the panel that I wish I could have been in all the panels. There was such good commentary, so I'd love to hear what you have to say.
For sure. So a lot of what you just said was really echoed in the panel that I was a part of. So I'm coming from the Parks and Natural Resources space, and during COVID, it was amazing to kind of hear from all these different park professionals and land managers that during COVID across the country, everybody was going outside more for the most part, and that we were all struggling with really similar issues of increased visitation, but then also struggling with a lot of equity issues as well. And I think that Dr. Fitzpatrick's keynote really speaks to the theme that was covered in our talks, is this idea of rebranding nature as a healer and also meeting people where they're at. So, I heard lots of really great conversations of, land managers talking about incorporating programs of community gardening where these gardens will now be healers to help heal loneliness. Or on the flip side, starting Park RX or Nature RX type programs in their landscape to meet people to help them heal their mental or their physical ailments. Just this idea of all these people like working together and trying to have nature really be accessible to everyone, I think really echoes into what you were talking about too with Next Gen, that, if kids are sad about the future, like now more than ever, we need to show them like nature is theirs and is for them and will be there for them. And that's going to look different across different communities, across different, there are different barriers in various places of the country. Not every community has the same issues or same barriers to getting to the outdoors. And, we need a network like this, like at Shift, to try and, work together on the best ways to kind of reduce those barriers for everyone.
Absolutely, yeah. And I wanted to speak a little bit on the great keynote this morning. That one of the lines that really stuck out to me was, if you build it, they will come, but will they stay? And I thought there was a really great conversation on the importance of that continued engagement in communities, building relationships, not just checking a box, not just touching in, but really what can you do to work with the community so that it's a sustainable benefit, that access to nature. And also, Alysa, you touched on this a little bit, but the extreme importance of understanding the cultural context and historical context that communities are coming from. I thought that what was said about the tree and how for some the memory of a tree is, oh, this was this beautiful symbol of life, a tree I climbed. But for other generations, it has a really challenging past. She talked about the symbol of lynching from the tree. And so I think that something I heard echoed a lot throughout this was making sure in the next generation that we are conscious of the communities people are coming from. And I also want to thank all the people who shared resources for better ways to connect with communities around that.
Yeah, definitely. I'm thankful to everyone who's been so willing to share and to offer help. I just wanted to ask if you had heard anything from our other ELP cohort members about the psychological resiliency panel that we weren't able to attend, unfortunately, and if you had like a key thing that stuck out from what you've heard.
Yeah, so as Christian was calling them, our spies on the ground, because we couldn't be in all of the tracks. So thank you to the ELP folks who were sending some what did we call them, knowledge nuggets over in the Slack. And one of the things that I heard in the past days was that importance of, said this a little bit earlier, but getting exposure to nature, even from the micro to the macro scale. So yes, there are these incredible treks. We heard a little bit about Outward Bound Adventures in our panel. And those are really important for getting this incredible access to nature, but recognizing that there are incredible benefits from just that 5-minute walk outside, that 20-minute walk around the block. And so thank you to the incredible researchers who are looking to quantify this. I know we talked a bit about how incredible this week is for bringing together these nature narratives, but then also being able to back it up with data, and how important having those two together is for not only grant writing, but also for being able to preach the good work that people are doing and get the financial and administrative support that we need for that.
Yeah, well, I think you and I could talk about this like for the entire keynote, but I'm actually going to transition into introducing our final keynote speaker, because I think that he is going to just offer the insight that we really need, and then I'm looking forward to the conversation with all three of us after it. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Tyler Norris. Tyler Norris is the Chief Executive of Wellbeing Trust, an impact philanthropy with a mission to advance the mental, social, and spiritual health of the nation. Over the past 3 decades, Tyler has shaped health and development initiatives in hundreds of communities in the US and around the world. He has an extensive background as a social entrepreneur and a trusted advisor to philanthropies, health systems, government agencies, and collaborative partnerships working to improve the health of people and places. Tyler also serves as a board member and/or advisor to Naropa University, the National Academies of Science, Children Wellbeing Forum, City Health, the Children Wellbeing Forum, City Health, Enterprise Community Partners, and others. Prior to becoming the first executive of Wellbeing Trust, Tyler served as the vice president for Total Health at Kaiser Permanente, where he led anchor institution work, applying all organizational assets to benefit the economic, social, and environmental contributors to health. He previously served as the founding CEO of a leading health consultancy, Community Initiatives, and as the founding board chair of IP3, the social enterprise that gave birth to the Community Commons, a GIS data mapping and stories platform. Before all of that, he was the first director of what became the Convergence Partnership, a head coach of the YMCA of the USA, and an advisor to Active Living by Design and the Public Health Institute. He helped open the Abraham Path through the heart of the Middle East and led the Kuistan Foundation that helped establish the national park system in Tajikistan. He is a graduate of Harvard Business School's executive program, earned a Master of Divinity degree from Naropa University, and has a bachelor's degree in world political economy from Colorado College. Wow, it's super impressive. And with that, I would just love to invite Tyler's super warm energy to the floor to give us our final keynote.
Alysa, thank you. What a really dear introduction. I wish my mom was on to have heard all of that. I've so enjoyed the conversations with you and Caroline and the team in advance of this, preparing for today, and it's just given me so much hope for our future. And so thank you. As a place to begin, I want to just, the last airplane I was on, mercifully I haven't been on one for 6 months, but the last airplane I was on went to New York and got to spend some time with Terry Tempest Williams. And I want to start with a small piece of hers from her work, Heart of the Land. And in it, she starts off quoting D.H. Lawrence, "In every living thing, there is desire for love, for relationship of unison with the rest of things." And I think as she lifted up D.H. Lawrence, and in the closing piece that I want to just frame from her words, is this call to remember our primary unity with Earth, our primary reciprocity and mutuality with all life, including Gaia. "The land is love," she writes. "Love is what we fear. To disengage from Earth is our own oppression." So with that, I want to share, let's see if hopefully that came up okay, and you can see me in some slides. I grew up in the mountains of Idaho as what we might call a free-range kid. Nature was my playground. Our boots and bikes and skins on our teleskis were our liberation. And some of my earliest friends, adult friends that were outside of ones my parents introduced me to, were the Basque sheepbirders who were up in the mountains of central Idaho, and certainly they understood reciprocity with Earth. And we used to sit with them, of course, not understanding their their unique language, was more an observation of relationship in nature and with nature. And on my scores of exploits over the years, whether sort of in that, as Lisa Fitzpatrick was talking about, that healing presence of alpenglow in the white clouds of central Idaho, or camped under countless stars, or at Concordia Base Camp looking up at K2 on the Pakistani-Chinese border, my well-being has always been boosted, always been built through nature, relationship with nature. And I would say that my resilience, my ability to withstand life's slings and arrows, my sense of tenacity in making that ridge has always been a source of great strength for me in times of joy and at times of great difficulty. And it's also been my greatest teacher in times of lapse of presence, lapse of attention. I've tumbled dozens of feet, like probably some of you too, on sharp rocks and hurt myself. I'm thinking right now of a place under Mendicant Ridge near the West Elk Wilderness up in central Colorado, where we raised our family, of that lack of presence being a place of wounding. And in the case I'm thinking of right now, my 12-year-old son literally had to pull me off the mountains reminding me not just of being his dad, but my dependence on the next generation, just as he's 25 now and another whole life stage as I look at him as a young scientist, bringing his life science around dust particles, work he's done in the Uintas to change policy. So that's just really where I wanted to start in this. Now, I'm sitting with you today. You see an urban background behind me. I'm in Oakland, which is the ancestral and undeeded land of the Ohlone people. And I'm well aware of where I sit right now. And also, you might see City Hall behind me, because out there, even today, like most days in Oakland, is a place of protest. And we're a city whose heart is broken open by racial injustice, by the centering of whiteness that has been neglecting people of color to everyone's peril, not only from a racial equity and justice perspective, but all of us have been damaged by white centrism. And Oakland reminds us of that as it leans into the arts, as it leans in to a local economy that recycles its wealth rather than pumping it off to wealth centers. That's what we're trying to do here in Oakland. And so as I sort of isolate between my homeland in Idaho and here, a red, blue, rural, urban, I want to share with you in this season of pain and protest and possibility and power, something that is both real around solutions, but also hopefully also a narrative of hope. I think we're all well aware. Now I just get to, let me just see if this will, there we go. That this is a time of extraordinary layered crises. Not only is COVID obviously sweeping the country, leaving hundreds of millions of life years lost, was the data that was out this morning, another way to think about this. But this sense of overwhelm and unburden, the unmasking that COVID has actually brought us, is a time to look at a number of things together, not only the biologic reality, and we'll get into a COVID conversation, but I think we really understand the biologic reality of our relationship with Earth, but the economic fallout of the social and economic fallout of COVID, which has reminded us of the lack of economic equity in the first place. And if we're going to talk about mental health and well-being, which is our core work, and we don't have an economy that works for people, we're not going to be able to produce mental health and well-being in the first place. Thirdly, this is a time of racial reckoning and a time where our social injustice is more visible than ever, like our weekly, daily marches, but I tend to join on Saturday nights out on the streets here in Oakland with peaceful protest calling for a new way. Martin Luther King reminded us that riots are the language of the unheard. And to me, I see the peaceful protests on the street less of a concern, particularly for white people, but more of a sign of hope and power. Fourth, the reality of the environment, which we're all talking about here, whether that's fires in the West, where I am here in Northern California, or so many else places in the West, or the hurricanes. And then finally, this moment of political unrest, where it feels like we can't even get our arms around the issues that matter because our toxic partisanship is so profound. And with that, sometimes it's easy to point at certain individuals, and probably many of us do, but we're all complicit in this, even when those of us who might find themselves a bit more progressive discount a conservative voice with a certain arrogance. You know what I'm talking about? We are all complicit in the discounting and the othering. Sometimes it seems more vicious, and it may be, but we're all a part of that. Even as we look at members of our community who might support certain points of view that we don't, and get fragmented by that. So with my kids, 27 and 25, whose pictures you have here, a little younger shot there, they remind us that over the last 125 years, the US has increased lifespan by over 24 years. In the last 125, we've increased US lifespan by 24 years. And in the last 3 years, we've seen the lifespan of Americans begin to decline. And my daughter has asked me very astutely, looking at an IOM report, right? The graduate student, that young generation, poking as she should at my generation. what have you been doing or not doing on your watch? And so that, to me, is the place that we focus. Now, over the last 4 years, I was asked by the Sisters of Providence in St. Joseph to lead what is now the only pure philanthropy in the US focused on mental health and well-being. Our goal is to save lives from deaths of despair, hopelessness, loneliness, isolation, dislocation, disrespect. Respect is to look again, right? Disrespect, lack of dignity, which is causing increased deaths by alcohol, opioids, and suicide, and decreasing well-being life years, as my daughter's pointing out. So what is underneath that, and how do we create a social movement? One of the first things we did with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and the Centers for Disease Control was to release a report on what is underneath this doubling, this every decade doubling of deaths of despair. What's behind it? And as I was describing, these intangible factors. As has often been said, without community, we're bereft. And therefore, in the time of COVID, even though we're predicted to lose 159,000 souls in this country a year from alcohol, opioids, and suicide, with this hopelessness and loneliness and isolation and addiction underneath it, it's predicted across 8 different models that we've run that on average, an additional 80,000 people may die by suicide and other forms of death during this period. So this is a really significant challenge, and it reminds us, however we sort of want to view this, that there is a multifaceted causality here, and that if we're going to really turn the tide on deaths of despair and increase well-being for populations, boost resilience, and address these mental health factors, you might think of them as the canary in the coal mine, as it were, that we're going to have to think about individual level action, systemic action, social and community conditions, all of that together with things that we might do in the short term and long term. This is going to have to be a systemic response, which means yes, changing policies, yes, changing practices, and yes, changing investments. And we're going to talk about that. And much of the last few days have been focused on that. And we have to build our relationships and power dynamics that are behind that, particularly around sort of a white-centered power structures. But more importantly, what is our mental model for actually who we are and where well-being comes from in the first place, and the nature and reciprocity that Terry Tempest Williams and D.H. Lawrence called us to, where I began, is right. So as a philanthropy and getting to run a foundation that makes grants, we have 3 priorities: get the care right, increase of affordable access to that care. That's sort of the job of a big health system, and we're part of a big health system, Providence, so we do that. But more important to this theme is, how do we create the conditions for well-being in the first place? So on our site, and we're going to share all this in the Slack channel, we have a framework: creating vital conditions for well-being in communities, making sure there's increased access to care. Many of you saw in California, Wellbeing Trust was part of a group that passed California SB 855 3 weeks ago. Governor Newsom signed it into law that increased mental health access for 12.5 million Californians. That's a gold standard for what coverage ought to look like. And then models of care. But if we don't actually get at what health looks like in the first place and where it comes from, we know that we're not going to actually turn the tide. We'll be essentially tinkering. So I encourage you to look at our resources in Healing the Nation, etc. But I want to start with this upstream piece that nature is so central to as we look at our identity, not with nature, but in nature, right? With nature. Not as other, but as self. So these conditions are, of course, reliable transportation, humane housing, meaningful worth and wealth, basic needs. All of that is key, but a thriving natural world is essentially an underpinning. A few months into COVID, the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention asked Wellbeing Trust to crowdsource with about 100 of our partners, 100 communities and NGOs around the nation and in locales around the country, to say, what are the things that we ought to be doing to create an equitable recovery now and to build resilience over time? And in about 2.5 months, because we built this incredible network over the last few years, we were able to lift up, and you'll find this at it says thrivingtogether.org. I got to fix my slide. It's thrivingtogether.us. Sorry, thrivingtogether.us. We'll get that fixed. that we found that over 100 different solutions you will find at thriving.us, that around this frame of improving well-being and addressing those vital conditions, local solutions that are pragmatic, that work in rural and urban, that work across lines of red-blue, that are in kind of the greatest untold story in our country is what communities are doing to drive change. So when we think about nature in the middle of all of this, and this is, I think, one of my favorite initiatives around Black birders, and I think Atia is a big part of that. You've got to know her earlier in the week if you didn't already. I'm so fascinated by what it means to engage with nature in new ways and do it with an equity lens, where all means all. Everybody has access, not just those that were privileged to grow up as a free-range kid like me, or some of you that have lives that are closer to nature, but that everybody has access to nature. One of my early mentors is a guy named Bob Samples, who with his life partner, Cheryl Charles, one of the founders of the Children in Nature Network, said, I will never make a decision outside of nature. So I know when I walk the neighborhoods of West Oakland or walk around Lake Merritt, some of my most important conversations take place there with other people or on the phone more recently. And that when I have a difficult decision to make, I take a walk. And that helps me get more in myself and my body, in nature, and believe more in the quality of the choices that I'm about to make. Up at some cabins we are blessed to have in Idaho, we support an organization called Higher Ground. And one of the reasons I put that up is just one of so many programs working with veterans, but something that I have experienced up there when the veterans and their partners show up with their kids, which is a way of relating. Like you see the awkwardness, there's the cabin, and how do we move into a place they'd never been, and how we're gonna relate to the lake and the shore and safety. And almost as if these young families sort of find a new way of being with each other on the lake, on the water, walking in, moving into the cabin, sort of, oh, I see who we are. We all have a way of relating with each other. We can break our ways of getting struggle and sought with each other and find new ways of relating. And just as true as in this park from Trust for Public Land, of creating safe, fun, engaging places to play in urban areas, where we should all have park scores that bring all of us in access to nature, not just the nice places and programs and structured sports, but places to play in unstructured ways that are so important. So much of our work, and I know we've talked much of this over the last few days, is how do we change practices like building the mental health skill sets of Parks and Rec staff and transporting data to look at who has equitable access, and walking and park prescriptions that would connect people to places to be active and play, or policy changes that we might be able to address, like green schoolyards or equitable land use reform or complete streets, but also how we move investment capital, the billions literally on Wall Street, into the kind of investments that get people more in nature. These are the kind of things that we are most interested in at Wellbeing Trust, and that we are watching literally hundreds, thousands of organizations in a distributed movement. Now I'm going to close in the next couple of minutes and go back to dialogue with my friends here, but I want us to think about the difference between a campaign and a social movement. A social movement is about distributed action. It's about people leading from where they stand. And when we said we want to build a social movement in the United States, we reverse engineered social movements, over a dozen of them, suffrage and civil rights and the environment movement, and said, what are the core elements? They have pathways to success. They have clear and effective communications. They have policy structures that both advance healthy public policy and build the political will to act. They have funding models to bring new money into the field. They have leadership structures. They build measurement systems, and they have standards of what excellence look like. When we stepped into the field, we did this mapping, asset mapping at the national level, and you can be doing it in your states and communities. What are those pathways for people to engage with civic muscle and belonging? Are there clear and effective communications work? Are there policy infrastructure? We found that some of that was missing. So on the right-hand side, you said, Well, that Thriving Peaceable Places, that was the springboard that we created at thriving.us that I showed you a bit ago with those pragmatic solutions. We created co-created the Wellbeing in the Nation Network, winnetwork.org. It's all in your Slack channel about pragmatic things that communities can do. We partnered with Kenneth Cole and the Mental Health Coalition to create effective communication. We launched Inseparable, the first 501c4 that's taken the gloves off and advocating for state and federal policy for mental health and addiction care. We helped launch Mindful Philanthropy to bring high net worth individuals and foundations more into donating money. We launched the CEO huddle of all the leading mental health organizations to line up. That's what we did at the national level. I want to ask you, what are you thinking as you think about the movements you're trying to build, whether your national work, want to join us in some of that, or in your state, or in your region, or your locale? What does the health of your local movement look like? If you were to asset map it, what's there? Who do you need to partner with? And what needs to be built? Now, we can't change the legacy we inherited. That's a fact. But we can change the legacy that we leave to the next generation. That's what it means to be stewards of the future, to change the vital conditions within which life occurs. My early mentors, James Rouse, said, a healthy community is a garden to grow people in. That's what our job is. And so how do we build those pragmatic portfolios in our communities with the kind of strategies that have been talked about through this Shift Summit that allow us to take action? Now, given the season, it's impossible to close without beginning with one of RBG's favorite statements from Justice Louis Brandeis, who said, "The greatest menace to freedom is an inert people." So she continued on, fight for the things that you care about, but do it in a way that others will join you. I know for me, it's about reaching out to conservative Republicans. I grew up in that household. I don't vote that way now, but I'm trying to reach across lines that divide and say, hey, that's the humility that's required in a time of extraordinary vulnerability in our country. And I know, like all of you, it's just, oh my God, how are we going to create a path forward? And so that's what I'm excited to talk about with my colleagues as Caroline and Alysa come back on, and I shift the share screen here and kind of go back to the dialogue is how do we be actors, not merely citizens, and recognize the extraordinary blessing that all of us are and have around us in nature and with the people around us to do what we can do as leaders. So thank you. Alysa and Caroline, welcome back.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler, so much. Wow, I mean, it was, really helpful. And at the end, I think you're really like hitting it on the head with asking those hard questions, like how do we leave things better for those who are younger than us, especially knowing that what Caroline was mentioning at the beginning, that statistic that these children really believe that they are going to see the end of the world, and if not them, that their grandchildren will. That's just like a really tough pill to swallow. So yeah, I just thank you so much for your perspective. And I can't wait to kind of talk about how, we are kind of in a situation of passing the torch. Like, you are definitely a leader for us, and us as the emerging leaders, one day we will be you, and we'll be sitting and talking to the children who are afraid now in a similar position. So I don't know if you have any suggestions for us on how to move forward, knowing the times, but I would just love to hear and get a conversation going about it.
I would like to hear from you, but I think one of the things that we found, we were all quoting the same person the other day, Howard Thurman. Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive, and go do it, because what the world needs is people who've come alive. And so I'm asking you is what's rising unbidden from your soul, right? As one of my favorite poets has spoken, what is rising unbidden? And follow that, because that's what we need. I think that if we are in fact part of nature, and nature is our antidote, that antidote is rising in and through us. And so what shall it be, right? As that poet continues.
That's wonderful. Alysa and I were talking with some other ELP folks yesterday, just kind of debriefing on things and talking about passing the torch and talking about ways that we can use the platform where we are to also break down barriers so that people can really chase what makes them come alive. Talked about financial and cultural barriers, and also some preconceived notions of what success really looks like. I think that if we are going to create this new world and take really change the downward path that we are on in a lot of ways, we're going to need to also change this notion of success, or notion of what it looks like to be a leader in some ways. I think looking for individuals that are leading within their community in non-conventional ways. I keep thinking back to the keynote this morning that Atya was saying, Tuesday's my sleep day, because I was just wondering right before she said that, when in the world does she sleep? She's doing amazing things. She's a nurse, she's leading this community, she's galvanizing this force. And sometimes it's the people that, you know, aren't always getting that recognition that we need to be sure to continue to encourage and to lift up, and encourage them to chase paths that are maybe more non-conventional too.
When, you know, just jumping in here and speaking about non-conventional paths, that makes me think about this Shift conference and how important, even though it is virtual, how important the connections and the relationships that we're making here, not just with the ELPs, not just with the speakers, but everybody who is in the breakout rooms, how critical it is for us to kind of, I remember Christian was saying that Morgan said that we lean in to the uncertainty. And I kind of think we need to preach that a little bit, you know, use this virtual time as a way to, you know, gain connections to help be your fighters. It is impossible to do the work as one person, but as a group of people who are passionate and powerful and like really determined, we have a chance. And so even though it's virtual and it's not conventional, like reach out to each other and use each other to lift each other up. I just think that, you know, that's one of the best things we can do. And I'm really excited to reach out to a lot of the individuals that I've heard from, to keep reaching out, you know, to you and to Tyler. So yeah, I'm just, you know, that gives me hope too.
I also wanted to jump in on that and say one thing, tying it back to the conversation around mental health, that I've really noticed through the time with ELP and even some with the Shift Summit is this virtual platform. Yes, we've still been able to lift each other up and encourage each other through that, but I've also noticed some increased vulnerability that over the past 6 months or so, I've had coworkers where we'll check in and say, what's going on with you at home that's maybe affecting your work, or how is your mental health today? And that is not a conversation we would typically had, but when we're all remote, that's something that we've actually had to discuss more, or it's become more normalized and less stigmatized. So I'm hoping that that's something that can kind of continue to carry forward, because I think if we are going to move forward in a hopeful way, we need to be confident and really being emotionally vulnerable at times in ways that can help build each other up as well.
Definitely. And, you know, being open and vulnerable to the idea of letting nature help us too, really trying to find ways that are individual to us and individual to our family members, and, you know, inviting someone out for a walk that maybe isn't expressing that they're, you know, having a hard time, but us knowing the power of nature and just trying to, you know, share that with them as well.
I know I got to a point a few months into COVID working from my apartment and Zoom that I was so sad. You know, I was working so hard to put this springboard out that we talked about, and I was feeling positive about that. But, you know, something inside I just was not well. You know, I was trying to get my exercise today, and I finally got up to Idaho in the Sawtooths and had a couple nights where I got to go up above Alice Lake and camped under the stars, and I just wept. Like I'd forgotten who I was. And when I got back, I just started thinking of all my friends and taking them out on these lake walks, just realizing how many people, even in my own friend group, and then thinking in our streets, thank God our mayor did a great job sort of closing streets for walking and biking, what we should be doing all the time with complete streets and park routes and bike, all the things that we know that would make, you know, sort of routine access to walking, biking, playing in our communities and parks, not just the wilderness areas, of how important it is to have environments that are conducive for us being in nature as part of that. That is our birthright and our need. And so whether we're thinking about our own self-care, which is really an act of service to care for ourselves so that we can act, just like holding a yoga asana a little long is to have that tenacity to then come off the mat and be able to is how do we have that capacity to drive the kind of policy changes and build the kind of political will, which means we're going to have to dispense with some of our arrogance with people who have different political points of view. And we may need nature to help us with that, to drop some of our arrogance. I know I have had to in my own political pieces. So to me, this is one topic: our politics, our environment, our well-being, and as is nature, one ecosystem.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Tyler. Oh, go ahead, Caroline.
Oh, I was just going to say that I shamelessly put on my I voted sticker because I did that yesterday and wanted to put a not so subtle plug in to remind people of that. I really appreciate how I think sometimes the outdoor world and nature can feel like an escape from politics, which is important. But I think bringing it back together is also so key if we want to preserve these beautiful spaces and give access to people.
Yeah, just what I was going to say is I loved your comment, Tyler, about not being like in nature, but being with it, like it being a part of us, like we are not separate from it, and just carrying that idea forward that, you know, just the reminder that being outside, even if it's in your backyard, is therapeutic and good for you. And, you know, we need to remind each other of that. And yeah, just this idea that, you know, if we are nature, like we need to protect it too, because if we're doing self-care, then we also need to be protecting nature. If we are one and the same. So just trying to, you know, echo that idea, echo the idea of giving back, and echo the idea of increasing stewardship from a young age, and, you know, doing it in different ways, doing it for different landscapes, just all of this, like such echoing.
Yeah, I can't help but think of E.O. Wilson when you say that, and how he talks about how humans have evolved in nature over time. That is an innate part of who we are. And I cannot remember who said this, but I've, you know, for so much of the time I've thought of, oh, you got to go out and get your dose of nature.
Yeah.
But I heard that notion sort of flipped, and thinking of it as, wow, that is actually where we're always supposed to be, and think about how often you're pulling yourself away. So kind of instead of that little source we need to dip into occasionally, remembering that that's actually the environment that humans evolved in, and how critical it is to reconnect to that, because it's an innate part of us.
I'm thinking about Meredith reminding us that when we all vote.org, which we've been talking about as a platform to use, that when we built the Abraham Path in the Middle East, the Palestinians have a beautiful tradition of sort of walking with no place in mind. And of course, with so many walls and the unfortunate oppression of the West Bank right now, that's very challenging to do. But when we brought Jews, Christians, and Muslims together on this path, the Masar Ibrahim al-Khalil in Palestine, the mantra was to walk side by side with the other. That sometimes, you know, we're looking at each other's screen right now, and you could imagine, even if we were 10 feet apart, sometimes you can get pretty intense facing another person. But when you turn side by side and walk in the same direction as we were, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and particularly with the difficulty of the Israeli-Palestinian peace, we found that we were able to say, walking in the same place, shared experience, and being in nature gave us a new way, right? It reminded us that whatever may divide us, that which connects us is greater still.
Gosh, that's such a beautiful sentiment. Just like letting that sink in. And I think too, yeah, I mean, it is nature that connects us, and it's what's connected, nature and health especially, it's what's connected every single person that is sitting and watching this webinar, who has been a part of this Shift conference, who has dedicated the past 3 days to talking and having hard conversations and asking hard questions and being vulnerable. And I mean, I think that, you know, without this, it's so hard to move forward. And I'm just super grateful for everyone's time and space. to be here. And Tyler, I'm thankful for all of your kind words and your perspective, and both the keynote speakers, Atia and Dr. Lisa Fitzpatrick. Really just great. Yeah, so I think with that, Christian, if you would like to help us out.
Well, and while we're waiting on Christian, I also wanted to say, while Alysa said that so many people have had asked the tough questions and had the conversations, I also wanted to thank people from the conference, from the panel, of the leaders for creating a space where that conversation feels safe to have and comfortable to have. I've seen a lot of encouragement in this community, and so thank you to everybody for making this be a safe space where we can explore those really important topics, because I know that sometimes that can be a tough thing to do. So the encouragement, be it through the Slack or through the chat or just through conversation, has been wonderful. So thank you to everybody, and thank you to our behind the scenes coordinators who have made this go so wonderfully.
Absolutely.
Thank you two for showing us what the emerging generation can bring. You give me hope, and all the fellows have given me hope for the future, that we are passing the baton to leaders who are more capable than us in showing the way. So
I have no prepared remarks. I have only an open heart, and it's filled with gratitude to you, our extended family, for sharing your fears, your hopes, your vulnerability. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for your work. Vote.